going to be the coaching video for those who lead, facilitate, or teach an on-campus group. It's going to be meeting on Sunday, October the 28th. Hey, this Sunday we're going to be wrapping up our study that we've been doing throughout this month, both in the book of Ruth and as we've been focusing on some of the promises of God. And so we're going to come back to Romans this Sunday to kind of wrap this study up. And I want to take a few minutes to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about in this lesson, and also to kind of maybe help you, prompt you on a few things that could help, could assist you as you lead, facilitate, teach this lesson in your own campus small group. Now, as we're wrapping up this study, we're coming back from Romans. Last week we looked at Romans chapter 8, but this week we're going to look at Romans chapter 11. And it's important to keep this in the whole aspect of the book of Romans. A simple outline for Romans could be something like this. Romans 1 through 4 focuses on salvation. We see that we're all desperately bound in sin, and it's only through the cross of Jesus that we are saved. Romans 5 through 8 focuses on sanctification, the process of God making us, helping us become more and more like Jesus, and that is through the ministry of the Spirit of God working in us, and that's pointed out in those chapters. Chapters 9 through 11 focus on the sovereignty of God, that God is in control, and He has been and is orchestrating all things together in a way that is for good and for His glory. And then the final chapters of Romans, chapter 12 through 16, focus on the aspect of service. Based on all that we've discovered about our salvation, our sanctification, and the sovereignty of God, then we should be moving out and serving God and carrying His purposes out in the world. And the passage that we're going to focus on this Sunday is found in that area that deals with God's sovereignty, chapters 9 through 11. In fact, it wraps up that whole section there. And what we're going to be doing is considering in that how that the purposes of God are being carried out, are purposes of God that He has put into place that are carried out to complete His plan, also guarantee His promises. So that's what we'd be looking at in that way in an overview. Now in Romans chapter 11, Paul basically answers a question that some were having at that time. The church initially started was primarily made up of Jewish believers. In fact, the first believers in Jesus, the first follower of Jesus, were Jewish, of Jewish nationality. But as the church began to expand, and by reading the book of Acts, that they began to understand the gospel was just not limited to the nation of Israel, but was for all peoples as God had always intended. And in fact, His intention was that the nation of Israel would be the one through which He would show His grace and His mercy for all peoples. That's why in Genesis chapter 12, God makes a promise to Abraham and says, this nation will be a blessing to all people, speaking of the coming Messiah, but also of the purpose of that nation as well. But the question that had arisen was, has God forgotten the people of Israel? Because as the church began to expand, it moved from being primarily Jewish to being mostly Gentile believers. And so the question that began to arise, has God placed, He set aside the people of Israel, He set aside that nation. The promises that He's given to them, are those no longer in effect, so to speak? And Paul answers that question, and he answers that question by saying by basically saying, no, that's not the case. That God may have temporarily sidelined the nation of Israel, but that His purposes and His promises for them would ultimately be fulfilled. But He actually used that rejection of the gospel, so to speak, in a national way by the nation of Israel as they pushed back against the Messiah, Jesus. He used that in expanding the gospel to all people. And so basically in a real concise summary, that's what chapter 11 is about. He uses several different illustrations to help drive that point. He uses his own personal example that he is an Israelite of the purest blood and the purest heritage who God had saved and was using to get the gospel to all people. He uses an imagery of grafting, branches being grafted into a tree, and that the root of that is the nation of Israel, which has come up, that God chose to be His people, to show His glory and His grace to the world. and that Gentile believers are now grafted into that by faith in Jesus, and talks about that there in that way. He uses as an example from the sacrificial system, talking about the dough that was used to make the bread that would be offered as a peace offering there. And all of those different things that he uses are to help us understand that God's promises to the nation of Israel are still in effect. They will ultimately be fulfilled. And the reason this is so important to understand is this, is that means that when God says it, it happens. When he promises it, it's coming about. And then he concludes this chapter with what sometimes is referred to a doxology. It's almost like a hymn of praise, a song of praise, a worship of praise that happens. And as he works his way through these, or as he gives us those final few verses, it also reveals some things about God that are important for us to know. We've outlined those in the lesson there. And about the wisdom of God, about how God always is right in the decision that he makes, and how that since God is the one who owns all and all resources are at his disposal, he is not indebted to anyone. All that he does is out of his grace and his mercy, and that his motives are always pure, that his promises not only are perfect for us in the time, place, and situation we find ourselves, but that his promises always are motivated out of pure love for me and for you. So just keep those things in mind as you work your way through. Now, as you look at the lesson, you're going to see that there's quite a bit of introductory information there into this particular passage as you get to the final few verses. You may choose to use some of that. You may not. That's given there primarily to help you get acclimated to what's happening in those final few verses there. And we'll leave it up to you to decide whether you would like to pull some of that into your small group time or not. But I think the teaching section there will be helpful for you as you work your way through that and as you seek to wrap up this study on the promises of God. I hope it's been helpful for you, and I hope it's been encouraging for your group. The study through the book of Ruth has truly been an exciting and challenging study, one in which we've learned many things about the redeeming love of God. And this Sunday, that's going to get wrapped up very nicely as we look at Ruth 4. Next month, we're going to be starting a new series where the focus is going to be on the Holy Spirit. And in our small group times, we're going to be working our way through Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18, and talking about spiritual warfare. And that will be obviously a strong connection as we study in the main room about the Holy Spirit. We'll also see how that gets worked out in our lives and we live out in the power of the Spirit of God that he has for us, and doing battle, so to speak, with those unseen forces around us. So it's going to be a good month there for November in that way. A reminder too, as you as a leader are looking at your calendar, small groups will not meet that Sunday after Thanksgiving. So keep that in mind there. So you're basically in the month of November, you're going to have 3 Sundays. You'll be meeting November the 4th, November the 11th, and November the 18th. On the 25th, small groups will not be. And then we'll pick back up in December. Hey, hard to believe we're almost at the end of the year. All right, have a great time in your small group Sunday. If you need anything or I can assist you in any way, please contact me or reach out. I want to help you do what you do. And thank you for doing it so well.